Lishma lo Lishma. The distinction between Lishma, acting for the sake of the divine, and lo Lishma, acting for any motivation other than pure divine intention, stands as one of the most subtle and essential threads running through the revelation of Kabbalah, especially in the Zohar, and crystallized through the teachings of the Lurianic school. At its core, this doctrine reveals a dynamic vision of human spiritual development in which the transformation of the soul is inseparable from the transformation of the cosmos itself. The inner struggle between egoic desire and selfless devotion becomes not merely a moral process, but a metaphysical engine driving the unfolding of creation, the repair of worlds, and the return of consciousness to its root in the infinite. To speak of Lishma and lo Lishma is therefore to speak simultaneously of ethics, intention, performance of commandments, inner mystical ascent, the mechanics of divine energy, the healing of primordial fractures, and the very purpose for which the human soul was emanated and sent into embodied existence. It is the story of how the finite learns to realign with the infinite. In early rabbinic discourse, the idea of performing commandments not for their own sake is recognized as an imperfect yet valuable stage of religious life, for even ulterior motives can eventually lead one to pure intention. But within the Zoharic universe, the questions deepen. What is the spiritual substance of intention? How does thought affect the vitality of commandments? How are prayer and study received in higher realms, depending on the state of consciousness in which they arise? The Zohar views human intention not merely as psychological content but as a real energetic quality that binds, unifies, or frustrates the flow of divine effusion. Commandments become channels of supernal light only when filled with the inner vitality of Lishma, the will to unite the Holy One and His indwelling presence. Without this inner fire, actions risk falling into the realm of shells, feeding the domain of separation rather than union. Yet the Zohar is not a text of spiritual perfectionism, rather, it is a drama of ascent. Humanity's path inevitably begins in lo Lishma, motivated by fear, reward, honor, or ego. This state, far from being condemned, is embraced as the necessary launching point of all souls. Just as the lower Sephirot receive influence from above before they can give influence in return, the human being first receives through self-interested pursuit of the sacred. The ego, which initially obscures the divine, is paradoxically the doorway through which the divine becomes known. The soul's journey unfolds through a gradual purification of motive, whereby the very desires that once served the self transform into channels serving the unity of creator and creation. The Zohar therefore builds a pedagogy of intention in which the lower state is not merely tolerated but ingeniously harnessed toward its own transcending. The Lurianic revolution would take these seeds and expand them into a sweeping cosmological map of inner intention. In the teachings of Rabbi Isaac Luria, the entire cosmos is defined by the interplay between vessels and lights, between the contracted space of selfhood and the overflowing radiance of the infinite. The primordial catastrophe of breaking vessels and the ongoing process of gathering and elevating fallen sparks through human action renders each mitzvah, prayer, or study session a direct participation in cosmic repair. Here, the distinction between Lishma and lo Lishma becomes a question of whether one's intention lifts sparks toward their divine source or allows them to remain imprisoned in the realm of separation, ego, and klippa. Deeds without selfless intention may fulfill the minimal obligations of law, yet they leave the deeper purpose unrealized. They fail to heal the rupture of worlds. Deeds done Lishma, meanwhile, activate hidden channels, drawing higher light into lower realms, uniting the male and female aspects of the divine, and accelerating the arrival of redemption. What makes the Lurianic articulation particularly profound is that it does not demand immediate purity of will. Instead, it offers a developmental psychology woven into the structure of the cosmos. Souls incarnate with specific root conditions inherited from Adam's fall. Some are born into states dominated by lo Lishma, requiring struggle and time to refine desire into holiness. Indeed, the very act of wrestling with impure motivation becomes a process of elevating sparks trapped in the selfish will. When desire for reward or power is slowly lifted into desire for union, the soul reenacts the cosmic journey from concealment to revelation. Thus, lo Lishma is both symptom of exile and instrument of redemption. Without it, no ascent would be possible. This dynamic journey underscores a crucial Zoharic insight echoed later in Hasidic interpretation. the human heart is itself a fragment of the Shekinah in exile. When motivations are bound to ego, the Shekinah remains trapped among shells, yearning for liberation. When motivations turn toward unity, the inner exile ends and the sacred presence rises. Every intention vibrates concurrently within the soul and within the divine body. The smallest shift of consciousness can trigger the highest unifications, for the microcosm and macrocosm mirror one another without remainder. In this sense, Lishma is not a mere ethical refinement, but a shift of existential orientation from separation to unity, from the experience of being apart from God to being a participant in God's own unfolding being. The transformative power of intention becomes clearest in the Zohar's treatment of Torah study. Study Lishma opens the supernal chambers and illuminates the soul, inscribing the student within the tree of life. Study Lo Lishma, by contrast, might grant knowledge but no spiritual life. The words fly upward only to be rejected. They wander without rest, unable to find entry into the palaces of holiness. Yet if the student perseveres, even for ulterior reasons, the Zohar promises that from within darkness, light will emerge. The hunger for honor will eventually reveal itself to be hunger for God. The garment of ego will fall away, revealing the radiance that was always animating the search. Thus, even misaligned study contains a hidden seed of Lishma, waiting to blossom. Similarly, prayer serves as the inner theater where intentions shape worlds. Words of prayer are like bodies, while intention gives them soul. Without intention, the words are lifeless forms, unable to ascend beyond the lowest heaven. With intention, they soar, uniting the Holy One and His presence, repairing cosmic fractures along the way. But again, the path is gentle. One who prays for personal needs alone is not rejected, for the lower will contains latent sparks of the higher will. Even distress-driven prayer participates in divine repair when it ultimately draws the soul to recognize the true source of life. What emerges through both Saharic and Lurianic readings is a vision of spiritual development as a movement of alignment. At first, the soul aligns with its own fragmented desire. Gradually, the soul aligns with the desire of the Creator. The shift is not a negation of desire, but the uncovering of its true essence. Beneath every finite longing lies the hunger for the infinite. Lo Lishma is merely Lishma concealed within a husk of self. The journey consists of peeling back the husk to reveal that all yearning was always for God. To grasp how the Zohar frames the evolution from Lo Lishma to Lishma, we must appreciate its symbolic anthropology. In the Zoharic worldview, the human being occupies a liminal place between two domains, the side of holiness and the side of separation. Every intention is a directional movement, casting allegiance to one side or the other. The ego-driven self stakes claim in the field of multiplicity, where the divine light appears fractured and appropriated by individual will. When a commandment is performed Lo Lishma, the act may technically conform to divine command, but its inner content fortifies the illusion of personal autonomy and thereby strengthens the domain of separation. In contrast, Lishma dissolves the illusion, returning the act to its source and reinforcing the unity underlying all forms. The Zohar thus places intention not merely in the domain of ethics but in the architecture of metaphysics. The interior dimension of a deed determines the realm it nourishes. But this metaphysical precision does not produce rigidity. Rather, it constructs a spiraling ascent. The soul, initially captivated by worldly matters, performs mitzvot out of fear of punishment, hope for reward, desire for community reputation, or passionate curiosity about mystical secrets. These intentions, while self-serving, nonetheless draw the person closer to holiness and allow divine light to subtly penetrate the depths of the heart. The first encounter with the sacred is rarely pure. It emerges within the pre-existing structures of desire. The ego uses the divine as an instrument for its goals, not yet recognizing that it is the divine that uses the ego to awaken the soul. Thus, the Zohar often speaks of a subtle seduction. God entices the soul into relationship by allowing the ego to believe it remains at the center. Only later does the soul realize that its desires are being reconfigured from within. This insight illuminates the paradoxical Zoharic teaching that Lo Lishma can be the gateway to Lishma. The spiritual path is not a linear movement from impurity to purity, but rather a pulsating exchange of concealment and revelation. One learns to act through self-interest so that one may eventually transcend self-interest. The primordial ego is a shell, designed to be opened. Even the sin of Adam can be understood through this lens. the separation of self-awareness from divine awareness inaugurated the conditions for return. The exile of the soul into selfish motives is the precondition for its eventual realization of unity. Without a sense of I, there can be no surrender of I back into its source. Lurianic Kabbalah amplifies this logic by embedding it in the cosmic fall of worlds. At the heart of Isaac Luria's system is the idea that divine light was originally too powerful for creation to contain, resulting in the shattering of the primordial vessels and the scattering of sparks throughout all realms. Human souls descend into bodies precisely to encounter these sparks and elevate them through action and intention. Therefore, the presence of selfish motives, rooted in the broken vessels of the primordial world, becomes the raw material of tikkun, the cosmic repair. When one performs a deed for personal benefit, one is in contact with the vestiges of broken desire. Yet by slowly transforming this desire into a longing for unity, one reclaims and restores the very sparks that were cast into exile. The impurity of motive is not an accident of spiritual immaturity, but an expression of one's mission within the grand cosmological narrative. This is why Luria does not posit a simple dichotomy, but rather a spectrum of intention. Within Lo Lishma itself, he distinguishes between actions tainted by completely selfish concerns and those tainted only partially by self-interest. The more diluted the ego, the more accessible the inner sparks become. A person may begin by performing commandments for reward. Gradually, the heart shifts toward love of God for its own sake. At a certain point, the desire for unity becomes so strong that even traces of ego dissolve. This highest mode, Lishma, signifies alignment with the divine intention itself, the will to bestow, to unify, to heal the fractures of being. The Lurianic transformation is not merely personal. It reverberates throughout existence. Every act done Lishma unites the masculine and feminine streams of divinity, symbolized by the union of the transcendent and immanent aspects of God. This union maintains the continual flow of blessing and sustains all worlds. In contrast, Lo Lishma leaves the divine aspects estranged, limiting the inflow of supernal energy and causing sparks to remain trapped. Thus, intention becomes a cosmic lever. The inner orientation of the soul determines whether the channels of divine influence are broken or restored. The Zohar's emphasis on cosmic unity finds new clarity in Lurianic symbolism. When prayer ascends Lishma, it travels through the Sephirot, unifying structure and essence, form and light. When it ascends Lo Lishma, it stalls in the lower realms, easily diverted into the territories of separation. Lurianic texts describe these misdirected intentions as vulnerable to parasitic forces that feed on spiritual energy when it is not sealed with pure intention. This does not mean that Lo Lishma prayer is wasted. It retains potential, but it lacks the capacity to activate the highest unifications without later refinement. This leads to one of the most compassionate teachings of Lurianic Kabbalah. Even imperfect intentions can later be redeemed. If one returns at a later time and repeats the commandment with pure intention, the earlier Lo Lishma action is elevated retroactively, and its lost sparks are gathered. The soul works in spirals. Earlier efforts are never lost, only deferred. The spiritual labor of today rescues the spiritual labor of yesterday. A deeper dimension of Lurianic thought introduces the intentional structure of Kavanat, the meditative focus that directs energy during mitzvot and prayer. Here, Lishma becomes a precise metaphysical operation, aligning the flow of divine light through specific channels to repair the broken world. In this advanced practice, the heart is no longer merely sincere. It becomes a cosmic instrument, conscious of its role within the architecture of divine names, Sephirot, and worlds. The Kavanist does not merely intend well, he intends in accordance with the divine blueprint, using each commandment as a surgical strike against alienation in creation. Yet, even here, Luria insists on humility. The pinnacle of Kavanah cannot be reached without first traversing the path of Lo Lishma, for the ego must first be filled and then refined into transparency. Psychologically, this transformation reflects the emergence of a new identity within the human being. In Lo Lishma, the sense of self is experienced as sovereign, master of its own destiny, seeking to appropriate divine light for its own pleasure or security. As one progresses toward Lishma, this identity undergoes a reversal. The self recognizes itself as a vessel, a channel through which divine presence expresses itself. The will of God becomes the innermost will of the person, not through suppression but through realization. The ego is not annihilated but fulfilled by discovering its true alignment with the infinite. This spiritual metamorphosis mirrors the Lurianic repair vessels. The fractured sense of identity is mended, becoming strong enough to hold the radiance of higher light. The Hasidic masters, inheritors of Luria's cosmos of intention, illuminate the emotional heart of this journey. For them, the transition from low Lishma to Lishma is not only an intellectual or metaphysical shift but an awakening of love. The ego's desires are the first flicker of the soul's yearning for God, disguised as hunger for worldly fulfillment. When the soul recognizes the true object of its longing, love becomes the engine of spiritual ascent. Prayer becomes the pouring out of the heart into the beloved. Study becomes intimate conversation with divine wisdom. Commandments become gestures of fidelity in a relationship of profound affection. Hasidism therefore embraces the inevitable impurity of beginnings, teaching that a little light pushes away much darkness. One should never despair over imperfect intention, for the very struggle is evidence of the soul's hidden purity seeking release. What emerges across all these traditions is a remarkable unity. Low Lishma is not the enemy of Lishma, it is the womb of Lishma. The soul begins in fragmentation so that it may experience the joy of union. The divine light hides itself so that it may be sought and rediscovered. The ego dreams of domination so that it may awaken to the greater glory of surrender. Thus, the path of intention is less a journey from wrong to right than a movement from concealment to revelation, from exile to homecoming. As we deepen into the transformative praxis of intention, a final truth becomes clear. The distinction between low Lishma and Lishma is ultimately provisional. In the highest vista of unity, all actions, even those that seemed selfish or misguided, are revealed as steps in the divine choreography. Every desire was a spark of divine desire. Every misalignment was a stage in the dance of return. The cosmos itself yearns through the human heart, drawing every fragmented motive upward toward wholeness. When this realization dawns, Lishma ceases to be an aspiration and becomes the natural state of being, the recognition that there is only one will acting through infinite expressions. The subtlety of Lishma versus low Lishma gains further depth when viewed through the Zohar's treatment of the soul's inner garments. The Zohar teaches that every thought, word, and deed we produce fashions a garment for the soul in the world to come. Actions done low Lishma generate coarse garments that cannot endure the radiance of divine presence. Actions done Lishma weave luminous garments, allowing the soul to stand before the throne of glory without shame. Here, intention becomes an act of spiritual tailoring, clothing the inner being with forms capable of revealing its essence. The garment metaphor expresses with poetic clarity that spirituality is never merely a matter of what one does, but of how deeply one allows the divine to permeate one's doing. The garment is the intention. The body of the mitzvah, however complete, remains naked without the soul of Lishma. This imagery finds a striking parallel in the Lurianic doctrine of Levishim, in which the garments of the soul serve not only as coverings but as vital interfaces between worlds. A soul lacking refined intention may reach the gates of the supernal realms, but will find itself unable to pass, for its garments are unfit to withstand the intensity of the light there. The garments formed by low Lishma are too heavy, weighted with egoic residue. Those formed by Lishma are translucent, able to draw in and release supernal radiance. Thus, in both Zoharic and Lurianic thought, intention is the alchemy that transforms the very substance of spiritual ascent. The role of desire within this transformation deserves special attention. Neither the Zohar nor Luria demonize desire, for desire is the energy that moves the soul. Instead, they distinguish between desires that coil inward like serpents, binding energy to matters of self, and desires that stretch upward toward unity. Even the darkest cravings contain sparks of holy yearning in a state of exile. The goal is not to annihilate desire but to educate it, to draw out the hidden aspiration for union buried beneath its surface. This education of desire is the essence of the shift from low Lishma to Lishma. When the soul begins to sense that true delight lies not in possession but in connection, not in praise but in presence, not in control but in communion, the fire of Lishma is ignited. The Zohar frequently expresses this journey through the theme of Dot, the consciousness of union. Low Lishma is a state of forgetfulness, where the soul does not remember its root in the infinite and therefore misdirects its longings. Lishma is the restoration of remembrance. The soul awakens to its true desire and recognizes that all existence is contained within the unity of God. This awakening is not primarily intellectual, it is an existential recognition that shatters the illusion of separateness. Prayer becomes not an attempt to reach God but a revelation that one has never been apart from God. Study becomes not a means to attain knowledge but a union with the primordial mind. Commandments become not obligations imposed from outside but natural expressions of the divine will beating within the heart. The Lurianic tradition builds upon this awakening by showing how intentions ripple through the cosmos. When Kavana aligns with the upper worlds, every act draws sparks upward, healing the wounds left by primordial shattering. This teaching reframes spiritual struggle, even when one fails to maintain. Lishma, the act of attempting it, of striving to hold pure intention, is itself a tikkun, a repair. The soul is like a diver recovering pearls from the depths. It must plunge into the murky waters of alien desire to retrieve the forgotten treasures trapped there. Each unsuccessful attempt at Lishma is a dive, and every resurfacing with even a single spark reclaimed is a victory. Hasidism later elaborates this dynamic through the doctrine of teshuvah, return. Imperfect intentions become the pathways through which one learns to return again and again to divine consciousness. The Baal Shem Tov taught that even a person who serves God for the sake of reward must not despair, for the very fact of serving indicates that the divine spark within is stirring. That spark will someday erupt into flame. He emphasizes that God derives pleasure from every movement of the soul toward him, no matter how clumsy or self-interested. Like a parent delighted by a child's first unsteady steps, the divine rejoices not only in the destination reached but in the courage to journey. To return to the Zohar, we find that the distinction between Lishma and Lo Lishma is often tied to the erotic symbolism of divine union. The sacred marriage between the Holy One and his presence is the axis of Zoharic theurgy. Every commandment is an invitation to this union. When intention is pure, the act becomes the kiss, embrace, and coupling of the divine realms. When intention is impure, the divine couple remains estranged. This erotic symbolism conveys the urgency and intimacy of intention. Human consciousness holds the key to the most secret chambers of divine delight. The soul is the bride preparing herself for her beloved. To act Lishma is to align with the flow of love at the heart of being. To act Lo Lishma is to withhold oneself from love's consummation. Yet the Zohar assures us that even the hesitant bride who comes reluctantly to the bridal chamber is welcomed, for the beloved desires her return no matter the obstacles. In Lurianic thought, the same union is depicted with greater structural precision. The male and female principles, symbolized as the transcendent and immanent faces of divinity, depend on human sanctification to sustain their harmony. When a mitzvah is performed Lishma, the spiritual light released ascends to unite these divine aspects. When performed Lo Lishma, the ascent is weak or misdirected, and the divine separation persists. Yet, Luria adds a profound twist. Even misaligned lights may be gathered later, through repentance or renewed intention, and restored to their rightful place. This reveals that spiritual history is cumulative. No sincere act is ever wasted, for every motion toward holiness remains stored as potential. Cosmic repair is patient. Ultimately, both the Zohar and Luria frame the journey from Lo Lishma to Lishma as a return to the primordial harmony before fragmentation. The fall into ego is not a failure but a narrative arc. Without separation, unity could not be revealed. Without longing, union would bring no joy. Without exile, home would hold no meaning. The entire story of creation, its descent into multiplicity, and its climb back into unity is inscribed in the human heart as the struggle of intention. Each time the heart turns from self-centered desire toward divine desire, the story advances a step toward its resolution. In this way, the categories themselves begin to soften. What we call Lo Lishma is already in motion toward Lishma. The seed already contains the flower. The exile already contains the promise of return. When the sages say that a person should always engage in Torah and commandments, even Lo Lishma. For from Lo Lishma one comes to Lishma, they are not merely expressing a pragmatic tolerance, but articulating a profound metaphysical truth. The divine spark hidden within selfish motive is the very cause of its transformation. The longing for reward will eventually reveal itself as longing for the rewarder. The desire for knowledge will reveal itself as desire for the knower. The yearning for protection will reveal itself as yearning for the source of all life. The shell of ego cracks, and the fruit of union is unveiled. The distinction between Lishma and low Lishma becomes even more profound when we consider the role of free choice in Kabbalistic anthropology. The Zohar teaches that humanity was granted a consciousness capable of choosing between unity and fragmentation. This power of choice is unique and perilous. Angels cannot descend into impurity and animals cannot ascend to divinity, but humans can do both. The inner battlefield of intention therefore becomes the arena in which divine purpose plays out, as the soul constantly negotiates between the inclination to receive for the self alone and the inclination to receive in order to share. Low Lishma reflects a choice for selfhood as the end. Lishma reflects a choice for selfhood as a transparent vessel for divine light. The dignity of the human condition lies in this tension, for only in freedom can love emerge. A union achieved without choice is not union. A desire that cannot refuse has not yet learned to desire. For Luria, this drama is rooted in primordial history. In the beginning, the vessels of creation received more light than they could bear and shattered, creating a cosmic memory of trauma. Every soul feels this breakage as a hunger for completion. But the initial reception was flawed. The vessels attempted to hold the light as their own instead of channeling it. Thus, low Lishma is not merely a moral defect, it is the echo of creation's first wound. When a person acts for personal gain, they are reenacting the primordial shattering, drawing energy inward without transforming it into relationship. Lishma, by contrast, reenacts the intended design of creation. The vessel opens itself to the infinite, receiving in order to bestow. In this state, the flow of light is sustainable and joyous, for the soul recognizes that the true fulfillment of desire lies in participation in a greater wholeness. This cosmic framing reveals why the transformation from low Lishma to Lishma is gradual and often painful. One must confront the deep-rooted fear that giving oneself over to divine intention will result in loss of autonomy, identity, pleasure, safety. The ego clings to the illusion that control ensures survival. But the Zohar insists that life is found not in clinging but in connection, not in holding but in flowing. The divine light cannot be hoarded, it must circulate. When one releases the need to be the center of existence, one discovers that existence itself is divine generosity. The transition to Lishma therefore requires both courage and trust, courage to let go of self-defined purpose, and trust that the divine purpose will embrace and uplift the soul. The process often unfolds through stages of spiritual destabilization. As the heart approaches the threshold of Lishma, the familiar motivations that once fueled religious practice lose their intensity. Fear does not command as it once did, the promise of reward no longer dazzles. One experiences a spiritual weariness, a sense of emptiness in the very acts that once felt satisfying. This period, described by the Zohar as crossing the desert, is not regression but transition. The old motives are shedding, the new motive has not yet fully dawned. It is here that many retreat, returning to the comfortable terrain of low Lishma. But those who persist through this dryness discover a new flame beginning to kindle, a desire for God not as means but as end. Luria's system gives metaphysical structure to this emotional terrain by distinguishing between lower and higher states of service. In the lower state, low Lishma still contains subtle traces of holiness, because the soul remains oriented toward divine action, even if for personal reasons. In the higher state, the action is animated entirely by the desire to restore the divine unity, but between these states lies a liminal region of inner purification in which old desires are dismantled and new ones arise. This is the stage of Hakna, submission, Havdalah, separation, and Hamtika, sweetening. The ego is humbled, its motives are separated from true will, and the bitter struggle is sweetened through insight. The desert becomes fertile ground. Hasidic masters describe this transformation with language of joy. They insist that Lishma is not defined by grim self-denial, but by overflowing delight in God. When one no longer seeks God for gifts, God becomes the gift. Every breath becomes prayer, every moment becomes union. The commandments cease to feel like obligations and become opportunities to touch eternity. This is why, in Hasidic prayer, ecstatic song and dance are not mere expressions of piety, but instruments of purification. They train the heart to delight in the divine for its own sake. The joy of Lishma is contagious, for it arises not from self but from participation in the endless dance of existence. Though the ultimate aim is pure intention, it must be said that both the Zohar and Luria honor the struggle. There is no shame in low Lishma. it is the beginning of the path. To condemn oneself for acting from ego is itself an expression of ego. Instead, one must bless the stage one is in while leaning gently toward the next. The sage is not the one who has eradicated ego, but the one who understands its place in the divine story. The ego is the cocoon from which the butterfly of the soul emerges. Without the cocoon, flight would be impossible. The distinction can also be illuminated through the lens of spiritual maturity. A child naturally seeks reward and fears punishment. With growth comes intrinsic motivation. Similarly, the soul's spiritual infancy seeks God as protector, provider, miracle worker. But as the soul matures, it learns that the greatest miracle is the presence of God itself. The Zohar celebrates the lover of God who continues to serve even when blessings are withheld, for this reveals that love has overtaken need. Luria would describe this as the moment when the soul's light surpasses its vessel, when inner truth breaks the boundaries of self-interest. This maturation is crucial because the divine response to prayer and commandment shifts with intention. Actions done Lishma draw down light that refines and elevates the person, reshaping the vessel to hold more divine presence. Actions done low Lishma may still draw down light, but because the vessel remains small and self-focused, that light cannot be fully integrated. It risks reinforcing the very ego that prevents union. This dynamic creates a paradox. Success in low Lishma can become its own trap. One may grow skilled in religious performance, admired by others, confident in one's spirituality, while remaining far from Lishma. The illusion of holiness can mask the absence of union. Thus, the transition to Lishma often requires a kind of spiritual displacement or recognition that external success does not guarantee internal transformation. Many who reach the peak of religious achievement discover a sense of lack. Their actions are flawless, but their hearts remain restless. This restlessness is a whisper of divine longing, calling the soul beyond the boundaries of self-image. The greatest tikkun unfolds when a person who appears spiritually complete realizes that they have not yet begun to love. In that moment of humility, the gates of Lishma open. Ultimately, Lishma reveals that there is only one true intention: to participate in the unity of the divine, to recognize the entire cosmos as the unfolding of one infinite love, and to align oneself with that love so completely that every thought, word, and deed becomes its expression. When this recognition takes root, the categories dissolve. There is no longer low Lishma and Lishma. There is only the divine flow moving through the soul. The purpose of existence becomes transparent. Tikkun is no longer merely a task but a joy. The soul, once exiled in selfhood, returns to the boundless home of its origin. To advance further into the mystery of Lishma, we must explore how intention relates to the very nature of divine revelation. The Zohar teaches that the infinite, by definition, cannot be grasped by any created mind. Therefore, revelation occurs in garments, through symbols, narratives, commandments, and the embodied world. Low Lishma attaches itself to the garment. Lishma perceives the light within. The shift in intention is the shift from mistaking the wrapper for the essence to understanding that every concealment is a vehicle of disclosure. When the soul acts for the sake of God, even the most mundane deed becomes a portal to the infinite. When the soul acts for the sake of self, even the holiest deed may remain sealed. This hermeneutic of intention explains why the Zohar places such emphasis on the inner life of commandments. It rejects a merely behavioral spirituality, a religion of performance without penetration. The commandments are instruments of consciousness. Lishma opens their secrets. Low Lishma turns them into empty gestures. To fulfill a commandment without inner intention is to handle a precious jewel without noticing its brilliance. The Zohar warns that such deeds risk empowering forces that distort holiness, for energy that flows without direction can be easily hijacked by the side of separation. Yet the remedy is simple: awaken the heart. Do not allow the hands to outrun the soul. Lurianic Kabbalah deepens this understanding by asserting that every commandment corresponds to a specific limb or faculty of the divine body. When one acts Lishma, that limb is healed and strengthened. When one acts low Lishma, the limb remains dormant or dislocated. The divine anatomy requires human collaboration for its wholeness. This interdependence is staggering. The Creator has made himself vulnerable to human intention. The completion of the divine name depends on the consciousness of the people who bear it. In this light, Lishma is not only a personal virtue but a cosmic responsibility. The psychological implications are profound. When a person understands that their choices participate in the unfolding of divinity itself, a new form of ethical seriousness emerges, no longer based on fear of punishment or desire for reward, but rooted in love and partnership. The soul becomes a co-creator, repairing a wounded universe not from obligation but from devotion. This is the secret joy behind commandments done Lishma, the thrill of participating in divine self-revelation. Yet, the path to such awareness is rarely linear. The Zohar acknowledges that spiritual breakthroughs often come precisely at the moment of greatest confusion. A person may serve God diligently for years, driven by egoic motives, only to suddenly confront a moment when those motives collapse. Success no longer satisfies, honor feels hollow, fear loses its grip. In this crisis, the soul perceives the limits of low Lishma. This disillusionment can lead to despair if misunderstood, but in truth, it is an invitation to deeper desire. God withdraws the sweetness of egoic religion so that the soul might crave the pure sweetness of union. This is the hidden mercy within spiritual dryness. Luria interprets this crisis cosmologically. The divine light sometimes contracts, creating a new void within the soul. Into this void, higher light can later be received, but only if the person perseveres without the crutches of reward. This perseverance, serving God in darkness, is the first true gesture of Lishma. It reveals love that does not depend on pleasure. It reveals loyalty that does not depend on visible guidance. It reveals trust that does not depend on understanding. In the Lurianic worldview, such moments are among the greatest opportunities for tikkun, because they involve lifting sparks buried in the deepest concealment, the concealment of motivation itself. The Hasidic tradition, inheriting this insight, celebrates the one who serves God even in confusion. The Baal Shem Tov taught that the most precious mitzvah is the one performed when the heart is numb, because its very numbness becomes the offering. In this teaching, low Lishma and Lishma draw close. The struggle to find intention becomes the intention. The inability to love becomes a plea for love. The inability to focus becomes a cry for nearness. Nothing is wasted. Even the effort to intend well is itself a form of intention. This leads to a remarkable conclusion. Purity of intention is not measured by emotional fervor or spiritual clarity, but by orientation toward truth, however faint or obscured. A person who performs a commandment while longing to care, while yearning for Lishma, may be closer to the goal than one who acts with confident piety. The broken heart is nearer to God than the complacent one. Lurianic Kabbalah would say that the broken heart releases the most hidden sparks, those trapped in despair and self-judgment. When the heart fractures, its shards reveal diamonds of sincerity previously unseen. Moreover, the Zohar insists that God delights in small steps. The slightest movement toward Lishma arouses waves of rejoicing in the supernal realms. The reason is simple: when the soul chooses union over separation, the divine plan advances. Even the internal conversation, am I acting for God or for myself, is already a victory, because it signals that the soul has awakened to its true purpose. Before this awareness arises, one may perform countless deeds devoid of intimacy. After this awareness, every deed becomes charged with possibility. In practical terms, how does one cultivate the shift? The Zohar offers a singular answer: remember before whom you stand. Mindfulness of the divine presence breathes life into action. When one pauses to align heart with higher purpose, even briefly, Lishma is born. Luria adds precise kavanah to guide this alignment. One directs the intention towards uniting God's name, repairing the worlds, and elevating the sparks that cling to the act. The Hasidic masters synthesize these approaches, teaching that a simple heartfelt intention, even without detailed metaphysics, can achieve the highest unifications if rooted in genuine love. Thus emerges an integrated pedagogy: learn the law externally, refine the heart internally, and unite them in a life of devotion. The external structure of the mitzvah channels divine energy. The internal intention animates that energy with consciousness. Without structure, intention can dissipate. Without intention, structure can deaden. The highest realization occurs when both are harmonized. As this harmony deepens, the soul begins to see that Lishma is not merely a superior form of intention, but the revelation of the soul's intrinsic orientation. The human being was created for Lishma. It is the natural state of the soul before exile into the body, and the final state after all purification is complete. The journey of intention is therefore cyclical. The soul returns to what it always was, but returns with the richness of experience gained through struggle. This return, tasting unity after knowing separation, is sweeter than the innocence of original harmony. In this light, low Lishma is not a hindrance, but a stage of awakening. It allows the soul to feel the sorrow of disconnection so that it may cherish the joy of reconnection. The story of every soul is the story of God loving himself through the mirror of creation. First through distance, then through embrace. Lishma is that embrace. As this path unfolds toward its culmination, the distinction between low Lishma and Lishma reveals itself as far deeper than a moral measurement of motives. It expresses the fundamental tension embedded in creation itself, the tension between separation and unity, between selfhood and self-transcendence, between the fragment and the whole. The Zoharic worldview asserts that God hid his face so that beings could exist who would freely choose to turn toward him. Lurianic Kabbalah expands this into a metaphysics. The entire cosmos is suspended on this hinge of intention. Every moment of human inner life reenacts the drama of cosmic exile and return. When the human heart acts for its own sake, it confirms the exile. When the heart turns toward God, it participates in the return. Thus, low Lishma corresponds not merely to selfishness, but to the deeper illusion of autonomy, the belief that the self is the center and goal of reality. This illusion was necessary for the unfolding of creation, for without it consciousness could not emerge as an independent partner. But its purpose is transitional. It is a scaffolding designed to be dismantled when its job is done. The ego must become the servant of the soul. The soul must awaken to its root in the infinite. In this transformation, the commandments serve as both the arena and the catalyst. The Zohar speaks of the kiss, a mystical symbol of divine intimacy. When one serves Lishma, the commandments become a kiss between the soul and God. Breath meets breath, presence meets presence. But when one serves low Lishma, the act becomes a mere touch of lips without the life of breath behind it. The external gesture may appear identical, but only Lishma draws down the living flow of union. In this sense, intention is the oxygen of spiritual. Follows is not erasure, but fulfillment. The part rejoins the whole. The lover rejoins the beloved. The question rejoins the answer. This is the secret at the heart of the Zohar and the Lurianic system. The ultimate refinement of intention is the recognition that there is only one will. All paths lead to this realization. All desires resolve into this desire. All actions reveal this unity. When the soul reaches Lishma completely, there is no longer a doer and a receiver, only the divine acting through the divine, for the sake of the divine. And yet the journey continues, for intention must be renewed in every moment. Each breath offers a choice, separation or union, self or source. The spiritual master and the novice stand equally before this choice. The world is reborn in each instant. So is the heart. Therefore, the teaching returns to its simplest form. Do the next deed with as much sincerity as you can. Let your intention be just one step more open, more honest, more loving than before. That step binds you to eternity. For in the end, Lishma is not a destination, but the way. The way of presence. The way of devotion. The way of becoming transparent to the infinite light that forever seeks a home in the human soul.